This is a story from when I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore in high school, and I had recently thrown my rebellious stage into full throttle, trying every drug available to me. The one drug I've never tried is meth, but as life would ironically have it, I started dating this meth addict named Richard. This story isn't so much about him as it is about his dealer, TJ. My boyfriend was a tiny, short guy who fortunately never laid a hand on me. His dealer, on the other hand, was a massive guy. He stood 6'3" and must have weighed 300 pounds. He had a machete he kept in his boot at all times, and I once saw him knock a guy out for simply glancing at his house. He is a schizophrenic meth addict and dealer. Also, he lived directly across the street from me. About 6 months into my relationship with Richard, I ended it and told my parents everything. They were concerned, of course, but I was still in a lot of trouble. A few weeks after we'd broken up, I get a Skype video call request from him. I stupidly accepted it, and he cut right to the chase, telling me that TJ's cousin had recently been arrested, and somehow their meth-addled brains believed that I was the cause of this despite never having met his cousin. I told Richard to try to talk some sense into TJ, but all Richard said was, "I'm just trying to warn you, he's coming," and ended the Skype call. Because I was a stupid teenager, I didn't report this to the police and didn't tell my parents until much later in life. I think my reasoning at the time was I was using a lot of drugs myself and I was afraid I would get in trouble as well. After the night of the Skype call, I saw TJ everywhere. He was watching my house. He would show up at the park near my school where I'd smoke, and I'd see him standing across the street from my bus stop. He never said anything or made any moves, he just stared at me. This continued on for months, ramping up my anxiety and making it impossible for me to sleep. I started falling asleep in class and finding riskier places to smoke near campus to stay away from him. It was total agony, knowing that something horrible was coming, but I was still too dumb to do anything about it. Luckily, TJ got busted after 3 months of watching me because some lady suspected he was making meth in his house. He's still in jail from what I know, and I never saw Richard again after that Skype call. I hope I never have to see him again, and I would be smart enough now to contact the police if I do. I was 11 when this happened. Ariel, my older sister, was 14, and Belle, my younger sister, was 8. My dad was a freelance programmer when I was younger. He made great money on his jobs, but because he was so heavily in debt, and my mom was not the most gifted person on balancing a budget, we never had much free money available. This meant we went on a vacation once every few years, and usually that was to a relative's house. My dad had just finished a long project for a big client, and we were celebrating the occasion with a new movie, Final Destination, because my dad loved watching scary stuff and scaring the daylights out of me and my sisters. We were in the middle of the movie when the phone rang. He went to get it and came back to grab Mom while we kept watching the movie. Belle took the opportunity to pause the film and take Duchess, our dog, captive because she was scared. They came back about 10 minutes later and announced that we were going to be spending the weekend in a cabin. We didn't know what to make of that, but apparently the client he'd been helping owned a nice cabin by a lake in the mountains and offered to let us lodge there this weekend for a considerably reduced price. It was Thursday, so Mom went into a panicked frenzy of packing, so we didn't see the rest of the movie that night. After school the next day, we packed up the family van and headed to the mountains. It was a 2.5-hour drive, so it was late by the time we got there. We unloaded the van and went exploring in the cabin. It was a ranch-style cabin with a little nook thing you could climb up to that was about head height. It was about 3 feet tall and probably meant for storage, but it was an excellent place for the 3 of us to hang in and play games. There were a few dozen board games up there, so we started playing once we decided on the rooms. Mom and Dad got the largest one. Ariel claimed the smaller one with a twin bed, so Belle and I got the last room, which had a queen-size bed we could share. We had a window on the right side of the bed, without a curtain, and a lamp on the left side of the bed. It was the only light source in the room, and there was a closet opposite the bed. It was locked, and we couldn't get in it. I never did figure out what was inside there. We went to bed at around 11. Belle is a kicker, so I slept by the lamp in case she ended up knocking it over. I remember lying down, and I must have instantly fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, Belle was gripping my arm and trying to burrow under me. She was squeaking something in fright, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I sat up towards her and saw something pale and human-shaped moving away from the window. My sleepy brain took several moments to process that, and then I was shooting out of bed and dragging Belle with me. We rushed to our parents, who told us we were imagining things. Mom told us to go back to bed, and if we saw anything else to let them know. I, much to my current annoyance, agreed with them and went back in the room with Belle. We switched positions because she refused to go back to bed by the window. I told her a story to get her asleep and promptly conked out after her. I didn't wake up until morning. The next day, we went exploring around the lake for about an hour before Dad decided we'd spend the day in the town. They had a lot of small shops, and my parents went to every one of them. We ate lunch and dinner in the town, and finally went back to the cabin. Ariel made a joke about something as we neared the cabin, and I remember everybody laughing before my dad suddenly held up his hand to make everyone stop. He took another step towards the cabin and pushed the door open with a single finger. I thought it was strange that the door wasn't latched, but didn't put the obvious together right away. Dad? Ariel shuffled nearer to Belle and me, but Dad gave his head a shake to let her know that she needed to be quiet. He went into the cabin and disappeared inside for a minute or two while we stood on the porch. Mom called out his name, and he called back that we could come inside. We did, and found him standing in the middle of the living room/dining room with a frown. He locked the door once we were inside and took Mom to the bedroom for a quick chat. Ariel, having caught on to what was happening, opted to distract Belle and me by suggesting another round of the board game we'd been playing the night before. We hadn't been playing for more than 5 minutes when Mom and Dad came back. Mom went about cleaning the dishes from breakfast while Dad joined our game. We played for a few hours before Dad told us we needed to go to bed. She was allowed to stay up until 10:30 on school nights and later on weeknights. Belle and I went on to bed while they argued. We climbed back into the same spots we slept in, Belle by the window and me by the lamp. I read to Belle for a bit before we drifted off. I woke to Dad rushing into our room. He scooped Belle out of the bed and grabbed my hand. He dragged me out of the room and into the hall where I saw Ariel getting similar treatment by Mom. I became aware of a high-pitched whine in the living room and saw our dog sitting at attention by the back door. She was bristled and seemed anxious. Dad didn't put Belle down and didn't let go of my hand. They rushed out of the house and into the van. Dad went back to get our dog, and then he burned rubber getting out of the cabin. He drove all the way back home without talking once. It took a half hour for Duchess to calm down. He told Ariel what happened the next day, but Belle and I didn't find out until years later. He'd woken up that night to what sounded like moaning outside the window in his room. He jumped up and looked to see what was going on, and had found the front door unlocked. Stuff in the kitchen had been moved, and Duchess started to growl at the back door, which was ajar. He locked it and got us out of the house. He went back the next day to get our luggage, and found several pairs of footprints outside Belle's and my window. This happened to me 20 years ago in 1996 in Orlando, Florida. I was 15 years old at the time and was quite fond of riding my BMX bike, as were the two friends I was with, Jake and Ryan, who were brothers. Jake was my age and Ryan was a couple of years younger. I was in 10th grade and had a class with Jake where we met because one of us saw the other riding a BMX Plus magazine. We spoke of where we would ride and realized we lived within a short bike ride of each other. We soon would ride around together fairly often. One day he spoke of some dirt jumps in the woods fairly close to our neighborhood. I had never went, but had heard of them through other kids at school. We decided that the next day we would go over after school. If you are from Orlando and lived near South Cimarron Boulevard/Gatlin in the mid-90s, you may have even went there to do the jumps. We left our neighborhood and rode over to the spot. It was all woods, but whoever built the jumps had cleared a small trail from the road, which we found quickly. We rode down the trail, and after a fairly short ride discovered a few pretty cool jumps. No one else was there, thankfully, so we had the place to ourselves. Eventually, we decided to call it a day, but us being young teenagers wanted to explore the woods before leaving. Bad idea. So we ride deeper into the woods down some trails that others had created, so we felt fairly safe knowing people had been here before. Eventually the woods stop and we reach a drainage ditch. We ride down a ways and come to a drain pipe that was covered in dirt to create a bridge over the ditch. We were pretty tired, plus I like peering into these Florida ditches because you can often see wildlife of various sorts. So we drop our bikes in the grass and start walking over this bridge thing to have a closer look in the water. This is when I got that odd feeling that we were being watched. This is when I noticed a tall, dirty man had emerged from the woods just ahead of us, wearing a long, dark trench coat. And it was later afternoon and very hot, so this was not normal at all. He was holding what I believe was a shotgun or rifle, but it could have been a long pipe as well. He had it sort of to his side, so his leg partially blocked my view. He was standing perfectly still, just staring at the three of us. I just stared back in complete shock. What was he doing? What did he want? Where did he come from? The two of them were still unaware of this man until I muttered, guys, with obvious fear in my voice. They both instantly turned and not a word was said, not from us and not from the man. We all stood there staring at him and him at us, or through us as it felt. He never moved. Shit, I don't think he even blinked. He just stood there with the most menacing look, never saying a word. I don't know how long we stood there motionless, but it felt like eternity. I don't remember who said it, but eventually the silence was broken by one of us. Let's fucking go! And with that, we all sprinted towards our bikes and pedaled towards the trail faster than I'm sure we ever had or ever will again. I don't know if they looked back, but I sure as hell didn't. We tore through the trails, past the jumps and back to the road in a heartbeat. I don't think any one of us had ever been so scared. I never went back to the jumps again. So, to the trench coat man by the ditch, let's never meet again. Since I like when stories include photos or maps, I've made one for you. Please forgive my terrible Microsoft Paint skills. Also note that this looks wildly different than it did 20 years ago. There were way more woods and way less neighborhoods. Thanks for reading.